Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, joined as always by our producer, Justin Stein. And today we've got two exciting segments for you. First up, we will have Nathan Cooper and Jeff Dean from the SIS Scouting team to break down the announcements that we made last week, the 2022 All-SIS team, the All-America team that we announced based on both the statistics as well as the observations of our ops staff that watches every game in painstaking detail. And then after that, we'll have Corey March on for the Betway Betting Corner. We both had a victorious week last week, so the competition is ramping up. You'll want to get in on those parlays on the Betway app. Let's get into that first segment, though, and let's start talking about some of the really great college football players that we've seen over the course of the year. I think when we looked at the All-American list, there were some names that we expected, some names that were surprises. We'll break down a few of them here today. But first, welcome to the show, Nathan.
Hey, Matt, how's it going? Appreciate you guys having me again.
Appreciate having you. Happy holidays. And we've got your consigliere, Jeff Dean.
Hey, how's it going, Matt? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I'm excited to learn a little bit about some of these players that made the SIS All-American team. If you missed it, you can find that on sportsinfosolutions.com. You can find the list. You can find it on our Twitter through @sportsinfo_SIS and the Football SIS Twitter accounts. But before we get into some of these specific players, I kind of wanted to just ask you guys off the top, what did you think in terms of the general group that made the All-SIS team this year? Certainly from my perspective, I noticed some service academy names on there that was something that caught my eye. Some names that I definitely expected to see on there. You know, the Heisman winners, no big surprise, even though we might have expected Bryce Young or CJ Stroud at the beginning of the season to kind of be in that first team spot right there. Will Anderson, no surprise for me. He's maybe been the best player in college football for 3 years. I think we could make a fairly good argument for. So he's the one that I'm looking for, that it would be very hard for me not to take number one if I was in that draft chair. What did you guys think from a high level about looking at that All-SIS team this year?
We looked at the eye test and we looked at the numbers. We came up with, kind of some of your stuff you were saying is we had some guys that just popped out that you expect, right? Jalen Carter, Will Anderson, Caleb Williams, the guys like that. But we also don't want to discredit guys that didn't play at a big name university, but still had incredible seasons. But you mentioned the service academy schools. We've got a bunch. Our returner was out of Fresno State. Like, these guys still played at a high level wherever they were. And our talented football ops staff was able to recognize that. We all kind of had a hand in voting and using kind of a little bit of argument to back certain players. And again, there were some players that were pretty unanimous across our board. And then there were some that were up for debate. But yeah, we wanted to make sure we recognize guys like John Marshall out of Navy, who, is a fantastic blitzer in addition to his coverage and run skills. Just because he plays for Navy doesn't mean he didn't have an extreme value for his team and play at a high level all season.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fun to go through and see how some of these guys are, both from an on-film perspective and, obviously a stats perspective as well. Like Jeff mentioned, these service academy guys, you got Isaac Cochran out of Air Force, basically our top offensive lineman in total points, played really well this year. A team that basically led the entire nation in rushing. So a really solid group out there in Colorado Springs this year. And then John Marshall, like Jeff said, really solid. And we also have a Navy guy or an Army guy, on our honorable mention as well. So yeah, like Jeff said, trying to hit across all conferences, trying to hit across all divisions and not just take the guys from the top schools every single year.
All right. Well, on that note, let's jump right in and let's talk about the receiver position. When you look at the SIS leaderboard for total points, I think there's no surprise that Marvin Harrison Jr. is at the top of that list with 39 total points earned on the year. You got to scroll down a little bit further, down to number 18, to get to Jalin Hyatt of Tennessee, the other selection there. He had 28 total points and certainly did it in terms of a basic statistical production standpoint this year. I think he had 15 touchdowns. But what can you tell us about Jalin Hyatt out of Tennessee?
Yeah, well, like you say, he's a little bit farther down the total point list, but I think that's, he didn't have quite the reception numbers that a bunch of the guys ahead of him had, but he was extremely effective when given the chance. Like you mentioned with touchdowns, right? He was pre-bowl season tied first among FBS receivers in touchdowns, fourth in yards, and third in yards per reception. But then when you actually look at the advanced numbers, he was even better. Among receivers with 70 targets, he led them all in yards per target, a receiver rating statistic, EPA, and EPA per target. So not only was it a cumulative stat and EPA, but when you broke it down per target, he still led. He was just off the charts phenomenal. I think most people will would recognize him from his 5-touchdown game against Alabama. And as you can see, we have an Alabama DB on our first team All-American list. So their entire secondary is stacked. He didn't just luck into this spot. He worked real hard all season. He highlighted on the biggest stage, and he was in one of the most potent offenses in the country. Definitely worthy of our first team selection.
Yeah, that Alabama game was pretty crazy in terms of just his productivity in that game. I am curious because he played with Hendon Hooker at quarterback, and that's somebody who's gotten a lot of love, not an all-SIS first teamer, but somebody who's made some noise as a draft prospect. I'm curious how you guys break down sort of the division of credit between what each of them was able to do as a quarterback and as a receiver. Do you think that Hyatt was somebody who was elevating Hooker's play or vice versa, or how do you guys see that?
I see it a little bit as both. Whenever you watched Hooker, obviously he had an incredible season, but there were times that he was a little inaccurate. And I think some of his receivers bailed him out, not only Hyatt, but you have Cedric Tillman out there, Princeton fan at the tight end position. So I think it went a little bit toward both ways there. So I think Hooker got a little extra help from the receivers, but I mean, you have these receivers that, obviously really good at running routes, really good at getting open. So they're kind of running open here a little bit, but that was an incredible offense this year, played at a high level, basically week in and week out against some top end SEC defenses. So I could see it going a little bit both ways, but I feel like Hyatt was sort of the recipient of some good balls there, but I think he elevated Hooker a little bit whenever he was in there.
Definitely two exciting receivers. Hyatt, an exciting pro prospect. Harrison, I think it goes without saying when you look at the year that he had. Are those two of the top guys that we'll be looking at as we kind of get into the draft process here?
Yeah, I think so. Like you said, Marvin Harrison, just an incredible player once he eventually is eligible for the draft. He's going to be a guy that everybody's going to want. Jalin Hyatt already declared. He's going to be a guy that people are going to look at really closely because this was his first year as a full-time starter. They want to see if you're able to scheme against him, does he change his ability? But he's got fantastic speed. And anytime you have that kind of explosiveness in and out of breaks is dangerous for a receiver. A few other guys that didn't make the first team all list, though, for sure worth mentioning is a guy like Quentin Johnson at TCU. That's a guy a lot of people have come on late about, and he's just a tough guy to tackle. He's just makes plays in the open field. In addition, at the catch point, I think what we're seeing in the NFL is guys like Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase is you have to be able to win in a tight area. You have to be able to fight for that ball and be able to find the ball with late hands and be able to snatch from the air. I think Quentin Johnson is one of the guys that really excels this year at doing that. Yeah,
definitely exciting player to watch there. I know Josh Downs was somebody that we had talked about a little bit earlier in the year. And then talking about Marvin Harrison, remind me the name of the other Ohio State receiver who was hurt all year, who might be the best out of all those guys to come out in the last 2 years.
Yeah, Smith and Jigba is probably going to be a guy. He's declared, and he'll be a guy. Even hasn't played hardly at all this year, but could be a first round pick come draft time.
Oh yeah, it seems like if he's anywhere near what he was before, it seems like that probably had a lot to do with why he didn't play at all this year and made sure that he was kind of getting himself right, trying to get a little bit more than that NIL money. Let's keep rolling forward. Let's stay on the offensive side of the ball. I'm just going to call him the Michigan center. You guys can help me with the pronunciation here. Break down the first team All-SIS selection at center.
Yeah, try not to butcher it, but I think it's Olusegun Oluwatimi. Interesting name there out of Michigan, but yeah, fun guy to watch. Interesting path for him. He actually started at Air Force back in 2017, redshirted his only season there before transferring to Virginia, played at Virginia up until last year, and then ended up with his final season at Michigan this season. Mainly a center his entire career, has a little bit of guard experience back in 2019, played a game there that he didn't start. But this year came out, won the Remington, won the Outland. He was actually a Remington finalist last year at UVA as well. A 6'3", 307 guy, probably projects best at center, but may have a little bit of guard flex there. But you look at the numbers, 39 total points. We're halfway through bowl season. He still leads all centers. And that was second among all offensive linemen as well. First, a guy that I mentioned earlier, Isaac Cochran from Air Force, just blew everyone else out of the water. Also our first team at guard there. But you look at Oluwatimi, projecting him to the next level as well. Solid run blocker, can help, get a little bit more help in the pass game. You look at the numbers, 16 run block points above average, first among all centers, -3 when it comes to the pass block. So still needs a little bit of work in the pass game, but the run game fires out, strong, good leg drive. He's going to be a guy that is going to be a media upgrade as a run blocker coming into the next level next year.
And you see him as a pure center in terms of what he does on the next level?
I assume we'll definitely be grading him at center, I would assume, but I would probably see him mainly at center, could be a little backup flex, over to guard if need be. But I see him as a guy coming in and probably going to be a starter at the center position.
Pretty interesting. You talk about what he did in terms of points earned and almost all of it coming in the run game in terms of what he was able to do this year. True road grader.
Absolutely. It's going to be fun to see where he lands. Like I said, interesting path. And I think he's a guy that definitely has the ability to play on Sundays for sure. And
you mentioned Isaac Cochran from Air Force, the total points leader. I just wanted to ask about him. Is he somebody that we could see as a Sunday guy, or is this just a result of being in that Air Force offense? Probably the answer is somewhere in between.
Yeah, probably in between. We may end up taking a look at him, before it's all said and done. But, that Air Force offense, I think some of it's a product of the offense a little bit. But, a guy that stands out like that among our metrics, definitely worth taking a look at for sure.
Sounds good. All right, let's keep it going and let's flip over to the defensive front. And I'm just going to say Newton, because I'm going to just avoid names at all times. But Illinois' defensive tackle, Newton. One of you guys want to help me with this first name?
Jer'zhan Newton, Illinois. If for the vast majority of the country, they might not be aware of how good Illinois' defense was this year, but I hopefully through our list and maybe doing a little more research, it was one of the top units in the country, right? We got the defensive tackle here. We got Witherspoon as a cornerback. Their safety, Sidney Brown, was an honorable mention, and they just really dominated everybody they played. Newton led his team in tackles for loss, sacks, and pressures, and that's tough to do from the defensive tackle position, especially in a 3-down scheme where he was mostly lining up in the 3 to 4 eye position. So he was able to generate a lot of interior pressure. And when we look at across the country, he was first in total points against the rush and second in total points against the pass. So he was equally effective in both aspects of the game. His ability to generate pressure and stop the run is something that's definitely going to be something teams are going to want to focus on. He's currently debating whether he wants to declare for the NFL draft right now. So if he doesn't come out this year, I would expect him to be one of the top prospects to look at for the 2024 draft.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. The production in both the run game and the pass game. And you're saying that as a third-year player, he might be back for more. I might have to give him some advice that it's time to turn pro, that all SIS selection. Yeah, super interesting looking at Illinois this year. Suddenly the defensive juggernaut. We talked about it a little bit a few episodes ago, but it's been sort of weird to watch the way Illinois has transformed themselves. Certainly quality of competition is not what it was back in the day, but like you said, against their competition, they've been pretty interesting the way they've been going about things this year. And disruptive, I think, is a good word when you talk about Newton here. We'll flip forward. We'll move right past Will Anderson, who I mentioned earlier, just an all-time sort of college player, in my opinion. But let's move to the back end, and let's talk about Tre'Vius Hodges-Tomlinson out of TCU. What can you tell me about the non-quarterback with the most total points in the country?
Yeah, obviously the name should ring a bell. This is LaDainian Tomlinson's nephew. So he's got some ties there, some star power there. You look at the size, 5'0", 7'6", 180. It's definitely a smaller guy. When you're looking at the corner position, he's probably going to project more to the inside at the next level, but played a lot on the outside at TCU. This year did play a little bit more in the slot than in previous years, but still, primarily on the outside. So he does have that ability to play on the outside. And you're looking at the Big 12. Big 12 has some pretty big receivers. So he's been going up against some of those bigger guys. But like I said, probably going to project more on the inside. But yeah, 90 total points, far and away the most of any non-quarterback this year so far as we're halfway through the bowl season. Can get a little bit grabby. I think that's one of the downfalls for him. I think the size probably, helps with that. I had 8 pass interference calls this year. So that, obviously going to go against him a little bit. But he's a solid cover corner. He's a guy that, he's quick twitch, has the speed, has the quickness, and plays well in both man and zone. So you look at his passer rating against, 39 in man and 30 in zone. Some pretty solid numbers on both sides of the ball, when you're talking about the different coverages. And it's not just that, he played mainly one over the other, it's pretty even as well. So solid in both. And like I said, one of those guys that has the speed, classic TCU guy, kind of, with the big time speed, good quickness, and shows that good transition ability as well. But you bump him into the inside, probably at the next level, and he's going to make some waves, in the league in a few years.
Yeah, he was third in yards per cover snap over the course of the year. Devin Witherspoon from Illinois led the nation along with Zachary Ford from Toledo, but he's a safety, so we don't even really count him amongst corners though. So these are the two guys. And yeah, statistically it jumps out. And I'm particularly interested in how many players it seems like these days are coming out that do have that sort of legacy, that sort of bloodlines like we talk about. You look around and you see like Oronde Gadsden's jumping out on leaderboards and all sorts of names that we've seen before.
Sertan coming out a couple years ago. You got all these guys that we grew up watching. All their kids are about to come in the league.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to see that. And there's been some Marvin Harrison we just talked about. There's been some real hits. And how about a snub? Let's talk about Joey Porter Jr., who didn't make the list. Anything? Well, was that a tough kind of cut for you guys, or how did that conversation go?
Yeah, I would say it's a tough cut. He's a guy that obviously has played really well at Penn State the last few years. And I think he's going to be a guy that he's going to come into the league and, be extremely effective as well. When we were looking at the total points list, didn't see him towards the top of that. But, again, we weren't all the way diving into just total points. The corner position, like we just mentioned, Hodges-Tomlinson and Witherspoon, those are two really good corners this year. So, had to leave a couple guys off the list. I think the corner position was really stacked this year, and trying to go, some of these other small school guys. You have a guy, Reddy Stewart out of Troy. Troy had a really good defense this year as well. We had a couple of Troy guys on the second team. So yeah, Joey Porter, definitely considered a snub, but I think he's going to get in the league and be just fine.
You mentioned that he wasn't somebody that popped on the total points list this year, and that's definitely true.
Yeah, Joey Porter definitely made a lot of great coverage plays, but he didn't have the impact plays we're looking for, right? No interceptions, no forced fumbles, no tackles behind the line of scrimmage. I think it's just those lack of those big plays you want to see out of your DBs. That kind of is what drove down his total points a little bit. I mean, teams definitely didn't, take advantage of him, but he also had a, relatively low bust percentage, right around 10%, which, for cornerbacks is definitely on the lower side, especially when we're talking about guys like Witherspoon and Hodges-Tomlinson that really were able to turn those plays into big plays for their defense.
Yeah, when you were attacking those guys, you had a better chance of having a -1 EPA play than you were of having a +1 EPA play. That's the sort of ranks that get you to the top of the All-SIS team. All right, Nathan Cooper and Jeff Dean, thank you guys for presenting the SIS All-America team. As I mentioned before, you can find that on sportsinfosolutions.com. And please look out for more as we cover the draft heading into the offseason.
This episode of Off the Charts is brought to you by Betway. Football season is in full swing, and you can get in on the action with Betway. From NFL to college football and more, Betway offers over 1,000 betting markets, generous promotional offers, and incredible Betway boosts. New customers get up to a $250 free bet upon registration. Download the Betway app or visit betway.com to start playing today. Betway boosts have limited availability. For new customer offer, must be a new verified Betway customer, over 21 and present in Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, or Virginia. Minimum deposit of $10 and opt-in may be required. For full details, see terms and conditions. Free bet funds are not the same as cash and are subject to restrictions. Visit betway.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit betway.com/RG.
Up next, we've got the Betway Betting Corner with Corey March, and we're both feeling pretty good this week. All we had to do was bring Aaron around, huh?
Yeah, I think we had to sacrifice Aaron to the betting gods in order to break down the barrier, because we both were winless heading in, and then we both took it down last week. So shout out to us.
Yeah, nice, solid bets for both of us coming through last week. If you made those parlays on the Betway app, you were rewarded handsomely. Going forward, though, I'm playing from behind, though, with your bet cashing out at longer odds than mine. I played it maybe too safe.
Yeah, I think it was the right move to get off the snide. But now that we're both in the winning column, I think we can up the ante a little bit, and I think that's what we're going to do here.
All right. So remind me again. Last week you had the Niners. I remember giving points comfortably, and then what was the completion to your parlay?
Right, I had Niners -6.5, which they covered with ease, and then I had the Steelers money line in the Sunday night game against the Raiders, and they trailed pretty much the entire game. It was a pretty ugly game, but they pulled it out late, Kenny Pickett led a game-winning touchdown drive right at the end, and they pulled it out.
Yeah, there was a little bit of sweat on my end too, but ended out coming pretty comfortably with my first favorite, the Chiefs, but then had to sweat it out because I thought the Vikings were actually going to stab me in the back against the Giants. But as I predicted, the Giants were more fraudulent than the Vikings.
Yeah, Vikings looked like they were going to try and give that game away, but they didn't. They pulled it out late. Ooh, that was a good game for me. I had a bunch of bets based on Justin Jefferson going off, which is exactly what he did. I had Justin Jefferson over receptions, over yards, touchdown, Vikings money line, all sort of combined in various ways. So all of those hit, and that was good for me. Good for both of us. Yeah,
it was a nice week for us, and hopefully for the listeners, if they got in on that, if they still had trust in us heading into last week, they would have been paid off for it.
They knew that we were due. So
that means your bets hit. I think Betway was boosting yours up to plus 175, and they boosted mine to plus 100 last week. Is that right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
So we'll return 275 units to you and 200 to me. Got to get that 75 unit lead erased somehow.
Yeah, well, see if we could do that this week. I felt like it was getting a little bit friendly around here. Like we were kind of just pulling for each other to get in the winners column. I agree, but now that dust has settled a little bit, I think the competition heats back up a little bit.
All right, let's heat it up. Let's roll forward to this week. You want to start off as usual?
Yeah, let's do it. So this week I'm taking two spreads. We've been kind of mixing in some money lines here and there, but feeling confident and just going to go with the straight up spreads here. Starting with the game I feel most confident in is the 49ers minus 9.5 against the Raiders. So funny story about this one, as I was evaluating the games yesterday, this line was sitting at 49ers minus 5.5, which I felt really good about. And in the midst of all of that, the line shot up to minus 9.5 before any announcements were made about anything. So it's funny that the odds makers kind of had access to this Derek Carr benching news before anybody else, because before you knew it, Derek Carr was announced that he was benched. Jarrett Stidham would be starting, and that explains the mysterious line movement.
Yeah, no surprise there. I guess not that mysterious when you really look at it. So that's funny. When you were looking, you didn't have the news that they were going to bench him. All you had was watching the line move and being able to just kind of assume,
Yeah, exactly. And I checked Twitter to see if there was any announcement, any explanation for it. There was some speculation that this could occur around the fact that Derek Carr has some sort of injury clause in his contract, and they may want to sit him down to avoid him getting hurt and paid for getting injured, or whatever that clause looks like.
An injury guarantee. Yep.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, before anything became official, it seems like the odds books were out ahead of it.
Pretty interesting.
I would have liked this line either way. I think I might even like it more at minus 9.5. I think Derek Carr is a competent quarterback. Can't seem to get the team functioning, but they scored 10 points last week with Derek Carr. You can blame some of that on the bad weather, but now you replace Carr with Jarrett Stidham, who we haven't seen a ton of, but I think that's for a reason, that he doesn't get on the field very often. Pittsburgh shut them down last week. They go up against San Francisco's defense this week. For me, those might be the two top defenses in the NFL. Not only did they bench Derek Carr, but they banished him from the team for the rest of the season, which seems like a good way to sum up the Raiders' just really dysfunctional season. And I think that carries through the rest of the way here. They're going to try and lean on Josh Jacobs in the run game even more than usual. San Francisco's first in run defense points saved, so not a good matchup for them there. 49ers for me, they might be the best team in the NFL. Could get the number one seed if they win out and the Eagles lose. They'll know by game time if that hope is still alive, but either way, the 2 seed is much more advantageous than the 3 seed for them. Obviously, a potential division round home game if they get that 2 seed, so that's very much still in play. So motivation for them. They've won 8 straight games, average margin of victory, 18 points. They put up 37 points last week against the 3rd-ranked defense. Now they get the Raiders and the 31st-ranked defense this week. I think this is a blowout.
Yeah, definitely has some of the makings there, especially coming off the benching of Carr. That does kind of raise a little bit of like uncertainty about the game, the way I think of it. It would make me a little bit nervous giving up 9.5 points and just not knowing really what you're going to get in this one. But generally the Raiders look like a mess. They're, according to total points, 29th in run defense, 28th in pass rush, and 30th in pass coverage. Those are the only breakdowns we have for defense. They're in the bottom 5 in each of the 3 categories. And they think that benching Derek Carr is the solution. I agree, you got to change something, but Noah Gatzik came to me with a question today. Would you rather have Carr and Devontae Adams, or would you rather have the Texans' number 1 overall draft pick? And I had to think about it. I think my answer is it depends. But like, to have a quarterback like Derek Carr in his prime, it seems like there might be some opportunity there, going back to sort of the class versus form thing. I think he's got a little bit more class than what he's shown lately.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I think Derek Carr is a quality quarterback. It just doesn't seem like the situation brings out the best of him, or he doesn't bring the best out of his team. It's hard to know the inner workings of what is actually going on there. But standalone, I think he's a good quarterback, and I'd rather have a good quarterback than somebody unproven. We see these drafted quarterbacks miss as often as they hit. So I'd rather have the sure thing. But looks like, I don't know, it's going to be hard for the Raiders to put together a winning team while Derek Carr still has good football ahead of him.
That's possible. Might be a win-win there, honestly, if that trade were to go down for the number 1 pick with the Texans. It's amazing, though, when you look at it. Brock Purdy just qualified on the per 60 snaps total points leaderboard. He's 3rd amongst the quarterbacks. He's just been playing, I don't think anybody thinks that he's Trevor Lawrence in the long term, but been pretty good. He's been pretty good and fit right in with that sort of, similarly to when Kirk Cousins became the quarterback of Washington all those years ago. And the Shanahan seemed to want somebody that didn't come with a lot of fanfare and draft capital. Seems like it's that again here.
Yeah. What do you think about Super Bowl favorites? I said I think that they might be my Super Bowl favorite at this point. I had been backing the Bills all year up until this point, but I don't know. The Bills defense makes me a little bit nervous. I think the 49ers are the most complete team right now, which is crazy to say because of who their quarterback is compared to some of these other top teams.
Yeah, outside of the quarterback position, you feel great about them with their weapons on offense, with the way their defense has been this year, and also kind of the way they've been playing, the way that they've kind of grown into the season here. I've been on the Chiefs all year. I'm still going to be on the Chiefs. I'll probably be on the Chiefs as long as Mahomes is Mahomes, just in terms of the most important player at the most important position. And I think that he is a bit in a league of his own, but only a few real contenders that come to mind. The Bills, the Eagles, the Cowboys, Niners. I think that kind of is the end of my like legit contenders list. Then there's like the funny Bucks and Packers that keep hanging around. So somebody's going to have like Jalen Hurts favored against Tom Brady in a playoff game or something like that, which is going to be really weird when that time comes. And then you got like your Bengals, and like they're hard to count out too, right?
Yeah. I like the Bengals, no doubt about that. Every week this seems to come up with the Bucks and you banking on a playoff run out of them. I hope they get into the playoffs.
I hate them. I'm just saying, this is how the football gods work.
I hope they get into the playoffs so I can bet against them. I'm just done with this team. But anyway, we'll come back to the Bucks a little bit later in the show. We'll continue on to the second leg of my parlay, which is Jets -1.5 on the road against Seattle.
I got to tell you, Corey, I cleaned up on the little app skins on Thursday night, betting against the Jets, just betting against Zach Wilson, essentially. I had myself a nice little night there. You're going to bet on the Jets because they've benched him, I presume.
Yeah. So I was on the other side of that game, not because I have any confidence in Zach Wilson, quite the contrary, but it seemed like a Jets line. And I think this is the 3rd week in a row with a Jets line. And what I mean by that is that the eye test feels surprisingly strong for that team, in this case, the Jets. So, you would think that the other team should be favored, or you should think that they shouldn't be getting or giving as many points. So eye test. And then the line continues to move in their favor. So this week it opened, Jets were +1.5. And now I've seen it as high as -2.5 for the Jets. So it shifted over that zero. And now the Jets are favored on the road. Looking at this face value, be hard to have confidence in the Jets going on the road and beating anybody right now. But I think there's a sour taste in people's mouths because Zach Wilson has kind of let the team down and they've looked terrible. He got he got benched last week when they didn't even have a second option. That's how bad he was. But Mike White's back.
What do you mean? They had Dark Tebow out there. I love this guy.
I'm a Jet fan. I didn't even know who that was. So maybe I'm not as big a Jet fan as I think. Yeah.
He's Dark Tebow. Just he's exactly Tim Tebow in terms of like gross throwing motion, but this guy's just going to go out there and win games, and he does it with like more of like a sort of dark feel to him, as opposed to being, Mr. Perfect Tebow everything. He's like a wrestling heel.
Didn't know who he was whatsoever. But yeah, we've got, we'll put all that in the past. Mike White is back in the huddle this week. The Jets have just been plain and simple better with Mike White at quarterback. The Jets passing game +2 EPA per 60 plays with Mike White, -10 without him. So that's a significant difference. In terms of the two teams here, I think the Seahawks overachieved out of the gate, and this version of them is their kind of true identity. I think both teams are struggling right now, but I think the Jets are the better team, and they certainly play that way with Mike White on the field. I think Geno Smith, it was a great story to start the year, but he's come back to the pack. In weeks 1 through 9, when the Seahawks were 6-3, he was 4th in passing points earned per play. Since then, they've been 1-5. He's been 24th out of 32. So went from top of the heap to kind of the bottom of the list. So, and that's what I think this game is going to come down to would be Geno Smith winning the game for the Seahawks. Kenneth Walker has been dealing with an ankle injury. The Seahawks are last in positive play rate on the ground, and the Jets' run defense is pretty stout, 3rd in positive play rate allowed. So I think the Jets can pull it out finally and put themselves in position to possibly sneak into a playoff spot in week 18, which I personally hope to see.
Yeah, sounds like a nice homer pick for you here. We've got the Seahawks 10th overall in terms of total points, Jets 14th. So they're both kind of right in that zone, about as well as they've played, maybe a little bit high for both of them there, just when you say it. But looking at things throughout the year, I mean, it's been a question of Seattle can score, but can they score against the Jets? Because nobody can score against the Jets very much. And when the Jets have the ball, can they score? Because Seattle hasn't much been able to stop anybody all year. So it's what Aaron would have called, the unmovable force and the whatever object. I forget all the words he used to use, but it is a sort of interesting matchup in, I don't know which of those actually jump out in front of me in terms of, I think this can work. I think this can't work. I think it's interesting that as Mike White has been solidified as the starter, that the spread has moved from the Jets as dogs to the Jets as favorites. But this one, good luck, man. Betting on the Jets, I'll leave that all to you.
Yeah, I think I'll definitely take that good luck because they'll need it. I think this is a toss-up. I think, like you said, the rankings are pretty close. I think those are more representative maybe of the Seahawks, who they were and who the Jets have been without Mike White and other quarterbacks playing. So, like I said, I think the Jets could be the better team here, and I like what I've seen out of the line. So from a betting perspective, that gives me a little bit more confidence.
All right. So you've got those two spread picks. Get some nice juice when you combine those together?
You do. You certainly do. Pairing those two starts at +256. Betway is boosting those to +300. So that's a nice chunk of change there. If this hits, that's +300 for 49ers -9.5 and Jets -1.5.
Sounds juicy that you get to bet against Geno Smith and stand to make so much money. But which Geno will it be? All right. I guess that makes it my turn. So after a good week last week, coming through with a relatively conservative parlay there, the minus to plus parlay, as you called it. This week, I thought I need to stick with the fundamentals. It was the fundamentals that got us through last week, and it'll be the fundamentals that win this week. So we've talked many times on this podcast about the unders being a better bet than the overs. A lot of that probably just having to do with the fact that people don't like betting unders. And so there is a little bit of an advantage built in there.
I actually took another look at that under hit rate, knowing what you're about to pull out of the bag here. Unders are still hitting at 56%. That's where it was when we checked in last. So I wouldn't say it's surprising, but it's a notable rate. Only 8 teams have hit more overs than unders this season. Only 8 out of 32. pretty crazy. So, I mean, either odds makers models are off, or more likely, I think sportsbooks purposefully do this to kind of offset the fact that they take a majority of wagers on the over and probably inflate the total lines a little bit because that's more profitable for them.
Yeah, I think that's part of what's going on there. And the other part of what's going on is scoring is down this year. So scoring has been down all year. And when you have a model that kind of predicts what the scores are going to be based on recent results, depending on how long of a time horizon, if you're looking on 20 years of results, it's going to be different than if you're looking on 3 years of results, and how much you're balancing what happened yesterday versus what happened 3 years ago versus what happened 10 years ago. It's going to change the way that those models will work out. So anyway, I'm going back to that. I'm going with the unders. I feel like I can parlay 2 unders together this week, get a nice kind of boost there, and do something else that you taught me earlier this year, which is that 41.5 is a key number. So before I tell you which games I'm going to take, I'm going to spoil this and say that I'm going to try to hit that inflection point to get above 40 and 41, which is the totals of a high percentage of games, to get to 41.5 on both of these games that have over-unders below that number. Are you ready to hear my very exciting bet on not scoring?
I like what I've heard so far. So yeah, let's hear what you've got.
All right. First, we mentioned them earlier, and now's as good a time as any to bring them back up. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they seem to not be able to score until the very end of the game, just as much as they need to squeak Tom Brady into the playoffs. But they've got Carolina this week. Carolina scored more than I think everybody expected last week against that friendly Detroit defense. Sam Darnold's been good for one more week. He's been solid there. But this game, the over-under was 39.5 being given by Betway. Like I said, I'm buying this up to 41.5 to get that 40 and 41 point margin in on my side here. But I'll take the under on Carolina, Tampa Bay, 2 teams which are unwatchable offenses for the balance of this year.
Yeah, can't disagree with you there. It's kind of amazing that this pretty much will decide the winner of the division and who goes to the playoffs. But yeah, there's a lot riding on this game. I think everyone's going to be motivated, trying to play their best. And I think the defenses are the best units that'll be on the field. So if they come out playing their best, then points should be at a minimum. Although Sam Darnold has led the Panthers to 3 out of 4 overs in his 4 starts. Lions defense was pretty porous last week, so I think they were able to run all over them, and that's where the points came from. Won't have as easy a job against a pretty good Bucs run defense this week, and the Bucs offense. Yeah, it's just hard to watch most of the time until late in the fourth quarter when they absolutely need to put points on the board. They're tied for the most unders in the league with 11, so they're at the bottom of the pack in terms of hitting overs. So that's good for you.
Yeah. This game, if I'm wrong, it ends up being like a weird track meet sort of game where, because the division's on the line, they end up starting to score points and whatever. But I like this game. I like it to not go over that 40, 41 point total mark. Like, this could be 21-20. That feels high scoring here for me, and I would still win in that one. Mm-hmm. So the other thing, and to your point, is I am betting on the front sevens, and this will be consistent in both of these. I looked on the trenches tool on the 33rdteam.com and saw the Panthers have a 6 ranking spot disadvantage against the Bucs. Their offense against offensive front against the Bucs defensive front. The Bucs have a -8. Their disadvantage when they have the ball against the Panthers defensive front. So really looking at that and looking at specifically the disadvantage when those teams are passing the ball. And I think it's a good sort of bet for that to go under.
Bad offenses with bad matchups tends to favor the under. Yeah, under does tend to be the side in the second meeting of divisional opponents. That's a historical trend. The first game between these two was 24 points. It was 21-3. Tom Brady and the Bucs managed 3 points in that game. So see what they could do this week with the playoffs on the line.
And I'm going to pair that with a game that's almost as gross in terms of being that it has playoff implications, but like really I couldn't have less interest in watching it. And again, this is the Cleveland Browns against the Washington Communists. That game was listed at 40.5. And again, I'm buying up that 1 point to get it to 41.5. I want to get that 41 number in there with where about 4% of games end up. So I'll buy that onto my side of the ledger. So both of these games, Cleveland, Washington, and Carolina, Tampa Bay, moved to 41.5 with me taking the under. And again, I'm looking at this game and I'm looking at two teams that have horrible matchups when they have the ball against one another. The Commanders' offensive line against the Browns' defensive line is the second worst matchup of the week, after only the Texans' offense against the Jaguars' defense. The Commanders, 23 ranking spots lower than the Browns in terms of their offensive line against the Browns' front seven. And then the fourth worst matchup of the week is the Browns, their offensive front against the Commanders' defense. This sort of thing will happen when the Commanders are 32nd in the NFL offensively and second in the NFL defensively in terms of their front seven. But this is another one. If they end up scoring a lot of points, it'll be because something really weird happened. But I feel pretty good taking the under here again. And again, a really tough passing matchup for both of these teams.
Yeah, feels like the way I summed up the first game is pretty much the same thing here. Bad offenses with bad matchups. Cleveland has been under their total in all four games started by Deshaun Watson. And the Commanders, they're starting Carson Wentz this week. That's certainly not exciting. I mean, he gave them a little bit of a spark off the bench last week, but turning to him at this point of the season feels like a desperate move. I still have more confidence in Taylor Heineke. Wentz probably has a higher ceiling, but as we've seen time and time again, that can backfire very, very often. So with Wentz, I would say a concern would be him throwing a pick six or turning the ball over and setting the other team up with good field position. But
that's a good point. I could lose this one if the offenses are so bad that the defenses score a lot of points. That'll be the way I lose. All right. So I'm going to take those two together. Like I said, I'm buying them each up to 41.5. What do I get when I combine those together?
So the original line for those two is plus 208. Betway is boosting that to plus 250.
Nice.
I like it.
Sounds good. Anything else before we get out of here?
Just the usual wrap up, folks. If you haven't already checked out betway.com/offthecharts, make sure you do it. Sign up for the $250 free bet welcome offer. Pick up these off the charts boosts, but also check out the boosts that we're running on a daily basis for bowl season. We've got a lot of good bowl games coming up, so be sure to check those out as well.
For Corey March and Betway, Justin Stein, our producer, I'm Matt Manocherian, and thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Off the Charts Football Podcast.